Thank you, Michael, so much, and thank you so much for honoring John Olver. The man was clearly overeducated to be a member of Congress for all of these years. He understood science, mathematics. He understood the future. He was constantly talking about the future, about climate change. He had maps on his wall in his office dealing with the rise in CO2 on the planet. When you sat there in his office talking to him, that's what was next to him. That's the level of importance which he paid to this issue of energy and environment and science in general. So John's leaving Congress is a great loss to us because he scientifically and politically knew more about these issues than anybody. He could link the science and the politics. He understood where it was going, and he was, for us, you know, a source of courage and direction for where we had to go. And for me, I knew that if he spoke on any of these issues, that he was right and everyone else was wrong. Okay? And I believe that from the day that he came to Congress in 1991. He spoke almost as a seer. So where are we? Well, this is a post-Hurricane Sandy era. You know, what had happened at the Republican convention was that Mitt Romney decided to make a joke about climate change, about the seas rising. And then, about 6 weeks later, Mother Nature got angry, very angry. And so for the final 6 days of the campaign, it was pretty much Mother Nature versus the Koch brothers. That's what the race was turning into, huh? And at the end of the day, Mother Nature, as she usually does, she won. Because you could see the shift in attitude. You could see the shift in the attitude of Governor Christie. You could see when Mayor Bloomberg endorsed President Obama, he says it's because of climate change. You heard Colin Powell talking about the issue. It was almost a little bit like Noah's Ark, where it was one of each, you know, hand in hand, going onto this ark to make sure that the word would spread, that something must be done. And so I think we're in a new era now, which is going to give us a great new opportunity to move forward. But let me note first where we've been. Since 2005, the United States has gone from 6 billion metric tons of CO2 being emitted per year up into the atmosphere to only 5.2 billion metric tons, which will be emitted in the United States this year, by the end of this year. So that's quite a reduction, 6 billion down to 5.2 billion in metric tons in a relatively brief period of time. Now, there's a number of reasons for that, and I think it's important for us to talk about it because it shows that real progress can be made when you begin to put the component parts of the individual energy policies in place in order to make it possible to be successful. So, as Michael said, you know, year after year, I used to make the amendment on the House floor to increase fuel economy standards. And in 2001, I lost. In 2003, I lost. In 2005, I lost. But Nancy Pelosi created a select committee on energy independence and global warming in 2007, and she asked me to be the chairman of it. Now, I had been on the Energy Committee at that point for 30 years, and I had been on the Natural Resources Committee for 30 years. So at that point, it was 60 years of hearings on energy that I had gone to. No other human being had ever done this in the history of Congress. And now she asked me to chair yet a third committee, the Select Committee on Energy Independence and Global Warming. And the first goal which we had was to increase the fuel economy standards. They had not been increased since 1975. And John knows everything about these issues. And in December of 2007, I stood with Nancy Pelosi over the shoulder of George Bush as he signed that law that broke the logjam that gave the authority to the president, which, by the way, President Obama used in order to increase fuel economy standards to 54.5 miles per gallon by the year 2026. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means, believe it or not, if it goes to that, that's 6 billion metric tons of CO2 that will never go up into the atmosphere. In other words, it's equal to 1 whole year of the United States. Actually, more than a year now, because it's down to 5.2 billion metric tons. So that was a huge moment. But it took political action in order to accomplish it, and then a president willing to take the authority, combined with Massachusetts versus EPA, the Supreme Court decision, in order to effectuate that end. And I'm very proud of that. Because, one, you reduce greenhouse gases, but two, you're also telling OPEC we don't need your oil any more than we need your sand. So it's a huge national security issue as well. It's about 3 million barrels of oil per day. It's more than all the oil that we import from the Persian Gulf. And what's the basis of it? Technology, science. Now, in the utility sector, this year there will be 12,000 new megawatts of wind installed in the United States. Isn't that amazing? 12 million new megawatts. So if you think a Seabrook nuclear power plant does 1,000 megawatts, and there is greater efficiency in a nuclear power plant, but 12,000 megawatts of wind in 1 year in the United States, that's huge. 3,000 new megawatts of solar, which is going to be installed in the United States in 2012. So just between wind and solar, 15,000 new megawatts. Now, what is that all about? Well, it's all about the stimulus bill in 2009. It's all about state renewable electricity standards. It's all about the tax policy, which gives 2 cents a kilowatt-hour tax break for the installation of wind across our country, which, by the way, is expiring at the end of 2012. In another 5 weeks. And the Republicans are saying they're going to allow it to expire. So one of the big issues that will be in contention between the Democrats and the Republicans over the next 5 weeks will be the Republicans insisting on oil tax breaks continuing, $4 billion a year. You heard Romney say he would never cut them. And the Democrats saying, this wind thing is working. You can't cut out that $4 billion a year. So we're going to come down to a real fight over this before the end of the year, because if it continues at the pace at which it is going, we will be able to add, most likely, about 75,000 new megawatts of wind and solar over the next 5 years in our country. We're already up to approximately 50,000 megawatts of wind. This thing has been absolutely on fire over the last 5 years. And with solar, it's just taking off. 3,000 new megawatts this year. The experts estimate 5,000 next year. The economies of scale are kicking in. Now, everybody here knows that Solyndra, this controversial solar firm, did not collapse because the price of solar was so high. It collapsed because the price of solar was so low. Solar dropped 50% in the price of generating a single kilowatt of electricity in 1 year. 50% drop. So the price is now plummeting in wind and in solar. And these changes are making all of the difference in the world in terms of its competitiveness with coal. Coal, the single largest contributor to greenhouse gases and to global warming emitted from the United States. So here's another little item for you. 5 years ago, 51% of all of the CO2 that went up into the atmosphere was generated by coal. 51% of all electricity generated in the United States was coal. 5 years later, we have it down to 36%. That's how rapidly this change is taking place. And there's a real reason to believe that the Obama administration is going to promulgate new regulations that deal with putting CO2 controls on new power plants and old power plants in our country. And if that happens, we're going to see a dramatically lower level of CO2 coming out of utilities in our country as well. And to move to the corollary subject, which is natural gas. Now, natural gas has issues with fracking. The chemicals that are shot into the ground, into the water table, has to be protected against. The methane that can be released, we have to ensure that they absolutely contain that. The wastewater, we have to make sure that's properly protected. But natural gas emits half of the CO2 as coal. So over the last 5 years, there has been 5 times as much new natural gas electrical generation in our country as coal. And you combine that with the wind and the solar and the new energy efficiency that's been built in, then you have a real revolution on your hands. In fact, natural gas is so cheap that over the last few years, 1.5 million homes in the Northeast have converted from home heating oil over to natural gas. Got that number again? 1.5 million homes have converted in the Northeast from home heating oil over to natural gas. So that dramatically lowers the amount of CO2 going up because it has fewer pollutants. And what we have to do is to make sure that we build in the safeguards, that we get the benefits of it. But in doing so, you can see a pathway to the future. Now, the smart grid. The smart grid is basically the product of 3 bills which I was able to pass back in the 1990s. My broadband bill of 1990, not one home in America had broadband in January of 1996 when the President signed that bill. Can I say that again? Not one home had broadband in January of 1996. So my satellite dish bill of 1992, moving over 200 megahertz so that these devices that people carry around could move to broadband, move from black rotary dial phones to BlackBerries, passed in 93, and then the whole broadband revolution. Well, the broadband revolution makes the smart grid revolution possible because to take the wind and the solar off of the deserts, off of the oceans, off of the prairies, and to integrate it in a way which is highly efficient with the rest of the electrical grid system is not possible if you do not have a broadband revolution to manage that electricity. So my 3 bills in the 1990s creates the bottom line technological capacity for the management of the electricity that makes it easier for utilities to move over to renewables despite their intermittency. So that's something as well which President Obama is continuing to move forward. Now, in 2009, Henry Waxman and I, working with Nancy Pelosi, John Olver, we were able to pass a bill called the Waxman-Markey bill, which had as its goal the reduction of all greenhouse gases by 80% by the year 2050, 17% by the year 2020. 80% of all greenhouse gases in the United States would be reduced by the year 2050. It passed 219 to 212 on the House floor, January 26, 2009, but Mitch McConnell and the Republicans in the Senate filibustered it to death. Now, the good news is that the individual component parts of the fuel economy standards, the wind, the solar, the efficiency, the smart grid, all these other things that are coming to pass, they actually have us on a pathway which it might be possible to reach that 17% reduction in greenhouse gases coming from the United States by the year 2020. We're already gone down from 6 billion metric tons down to 5.2 billion metric tons this year, over a 7-year period. So it's going to be a battle. It's going to be a fight. It's going to take the energy of everyone to be a part of this monumental struggle to deal with the greatest threat that our planet has ever known. The planet is running a fever. There are no emergency rooms for planets. We have to engage in preventative activity at the local level, the local planning level, the Pioneer Valley level, at the state level, at the federal level, and ultimately, we have to have credibility in order to talk to the Chinese and the Indians. You cannot preach temperance from a bar stool. You yourself cannot be smoking a cigar while you're telling the kids smoking's bad for you. You can't have a beer in your hand saying don't take up drinking, and you can't tell the Chinese and the Indians, do not emit CO2, it's bad for the planet, if you don't have a comprehensive plan in place. It just doesn't work. And so, while we're making progress, we have to ensure that we continue to make the advancement that is so comprehensive that, in fact, we have the credibility, the moral, the political credibility to be able to say to the Chinese and Indians, let us work together to save the planet from the worst consequences of climate change. You've seen it in your region. We have now seen it in the Gulf of Mexico, but now we've seen it hitting the city of New York and New Jersey. If that storm had hit Boston, Faneuil Hall would have been under 15 feet of water. Back Bay would have returned to its original personality as a bay. It would have been buried in water. Huh? That's the reality. So we've received the warning. We have a chance to do something. And there's no better place for it to come from than the Minutemen of Massachusetts, okay, who have risen up throughout history in order to be at the cutting edge of all of these revolutions. Huh? That's where it comes from us here in Massachusetts. And whether it be the Freedom Riders that went south for voting rights, the suffragettes that rose up to say that women have a right to vote, the movement against the war in Vietnam that ultimately brought it to its end, the call for health care for all, which passed finally on the House floor in 2009, and now climate change. It must come from us. Thank you all so much for everything that you do on this issue.